Today's topic is fluency. Some people think that fluency is a new idea in education, when really it has roots dating back to the early 1900s, when Sir Edmund Huey described the development of fluent oral reading. Essentially, fluency involves doing at least two things at once. In our case, decoding and comprehending. Think about driving a car. Your feet, hands, eyes, and brain are all working fluently together in an automatic way to operate your vehicle. Have you ever gotten to your destination and then wondered how you got there because you don't even remember making the correct turns? This is an example of automaticity. Essentially, our goal for our readers is the same. Eyes and brain working together so effortlessly, the process is automatic. Fluency was thrust into the educational spotlight after the National Reading Panel named it as one of the 5 building blocks or pillars of reading. Fluency is considered a critical skill for these two reasons. Good reading comprehension rests on a foundation of fluent reading of words. The less attention the brain needs to spend on decoding, the more time the brain has for comprehending. Next, good readers rapidly recognize words without having to think about what the words are, and they automatically activate the meanings of the words they are reading. Let's make sure that we have a working definition of fluency. Fluency is not just about speed reading. In fact, it should never be about speed reading. Instead, fluency consists of these 3 components. Fluency is the ability to read accurately and at an appropriate rate using prosody. Notice we said appropriate rate. This is not the same as fast. The appropriate rate for a student changes over time and also is dependent on what the student is reading. Appropriate rates are usually expressed as a range and will be addressed in an upcoming slide. Here are a few commonly used vocabulary words dealing with fluency that you should be familiar with. We already discussed the definition of the word fluency. Another term that you might have heard is the term nonsense word fluency. This is the ability to identify make-believe words automatically, thus eliminating the possibility that the word is in the student's sight vocabulary. We discussed nonsense words when we talked about assessment during phonics. Oral reading fluency, or ORF, is the ability to identify words in a passage accurately. Prosody, the intonation, expression, and attention to punctuation needed for proficient reading. And words correct per minute, usually expressed as WCPM, a score obtained by timing a student read orally. Here's something to think about. What are some behaviors you might observe in the classroom that indicate some students are struggling with fluency? Did you think of any of these scenarios? A student reads slowly and haltingly, or in a monotone, expressionless manner. Perhaps the student does not chunk words into meaningful phrases, or they don't attend to punctuation while reading, or they read so fast that comprehension is affected in a negative way. Remember speed reading? Fluency is not reading fast. Think about the driving scenario. Sometimes you have to come out of automatic pilot mode and actually think about where you are going, where you need to turn, or if you need to backtrack. Remember, fluency is about knowing when to slow down if you are not understanding. There are many ways to assess fluency. Assessment is essential. We cannot accurately rely on only our ear to determine if a student sounds like a fluent reader, although observation can be one component of assessment. To truly determine if a student is reading at an appropriate rate, you need to time the student reading a passage. There are a number of ways to do this. For instance, you can have the student read out loud for a minute and then count up the words he or she read correctly. Or you can have the student read a whole passage and then use a formula to determine the number of correct words read per minute. Here are some common ways to assess fluency. Conduct a running record or an informal reading inventory as a timed reading. Use a fluency rubric in conjunction with a timed reading. And then a more formal assessment, very commonly used in today's schools, is the Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills, also known as DIBELS, and the test we're talking about here is the Test of Oral Reading Fluency, beginning in first grade. You can revisit the DIBELS website if you want to know more about DIBELS ORF. Remember, appropriate fluency rates depend on the child's reading level and should increase as the child gets older and becomes a more accurate and automatic decoder. Notice how this chart provides a range of rates for each grade level over the course of a year. If there was a magic number, do you know what it would be? Here it is, 110 words correct per minute by the end of third grade. This is the number that has been correlated by a number of studies to proficient scores on state assessments like the PSSA. In general, third graders who read at about 110 words correct per minute by the end of third grade are more likely to score proficient or advanced on their state reading test than students who read below 110 words correct per minute. There are many effective strategies for helping students become more fluent. Among some of the most popular are repeated readings, reader's theater, and the explicit teaching of fluent reading behaviors using the gradual release of responsibility model discussed in the previous module. Your book goes over many of these strategies in great detail. Let's talk about opportunities for daily practice. There are many opportunities for practicing oral reading fluency during the day. There are lots of great opportunities to have students read orally for a purpose. One oral reading technique that is not effective and should never be used is called round-robin reading. This is a practice that still goes on in many classrooms and involves students reading one after the other in a rote fashion. You may remember round-robin reading from your elementary school days. Round-robin reading has been proven time after time to be a harmful reading practice, but teachers continue to do it. Don't be one of them. One other thing to keep in mind is that in order to become a more fluent reader, the student needs to be reading texts they can actually handle. When students are reading independently, they should be reading books that are at their independent reading level. When they are working with you as the teacher on different reading strategies, you should be using books at their instructional level. There is no place for frustrational reading in the classroom. If a book is too hard, someone should be reading that book to the child. A student simply cannot learn at their frustrational level. This is too far outside of their zone of proximal development. The 5-finger rule is really just a trick for having the students determine if a book is just right for them. Basically, they choose any page from the middle of the book and start to read. They should put up a finger every time they get to a word they can't decode or don't know what it means. If they put up all 5 fingers before the end of the page, it's too hard for them to read independently. This is not a foolproof trick, but it is a way to begin to teach students how to appropriately self-select reading material. In summary, remember these important things when working on fluency. First, mastery of phonemic awareness and phonics is necessary before working on oral reading fluency. Next, assessment is critical to inform fluency instruction. And last, some students will need explicit and systematic instruction in how to become a more fluent reader.